Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf kuf farm and hey Bava Basra 135. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim, Matzot for the Shvuyim, and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In this Eis Tzara, the daf yomi, we're going to start on the top of 135a. Where is discussing under what circumstances and how we can believe the believe a husband about what he claims about either his wife being able to do, if she's required to do chalitza to have whatever marriage, or she can marry right away. Teres lashuk, as we say, permitted to the marketplace. So who there was a guy who was about to die, and he had brothers, but he didn't have children, and so therefore the assumption is that she would have to do yibum, she'd have to marry, or chalitza, marry her husband's brother. So Amrulay, so they said to him, Ach Laman. So they said to him, Issa Laman, who can your wife marry? Meaning to say, does she have to do Yibam? Amrullahu. So he said back to them, Chazia. That is the Rashbam's version of the text. There's different versions. So he responds back to her, Chazil Kahana Rabba. She can even marry the Kohen Gadol. Rashbam says this is Lav Davka. It's not exact. He means to say that she doesn't have to do Yibum, but obviously she can't marry the Kohen Gadol because she's a widow, but she couldn't even marry a Kohen because she doesn't have a migo to say that she was. The only reason why we believe him to say that she was able to marry is because since he could have claimed I divorced my wife, he's also believed to say that she doesn't fall to Yibum. So we see, but so she can't even marry the Kohen Gadol because only regular Kohen. But anyway, we see from here that she can marry under these circumstances. We believe him. So Rava says, of course we should believe him because my nichushla. What would we have to be concerned about? Didn't we have a statement which we said in yesterday's daf? The husband says, I divorced my wife, he's going to be believed. So we see from here, if the husband claims he divorced his wife, he's believed. In this case too, since the husband claims he divorced his wife, he's believed. And so therefore, she doesn't, we believe him. So Amr Abaye, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, but we have a conflicting statement of Rabbi Yochanan where he said, Baal Shamar Garash Yes Ishti Edo Neman, where he says, a husband who says I divorced my wife is not believed. So you say we believe him because of the statement to Rabbi Yochanan, but we have another statement where Rabbi Yochanan says he's not believed. So which is it? So the Gemara says, yeah. Rava responds to Abaye, Amrway, yeah, but didn't we explain that the contradictory statements of Rabbi Yochanan are not reflecting two different versions of what Rabbi Yochanan said, but two different scenarios, two different contexts? And if it was about an event in the past, Rabbi Yochanan says we don't believe him, but about this point going forward, we believe him. So if the husband says at this point before he's dead that his wife is divorced, we should believe him, like the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. So Gemara says that Abaye responds to Rava, Va'ashinuye nekum v'lismoch. So Abaye says to Rava, that was a way that we tried to do a shinuye. We tried to figure out how to make sense of the contradictions, but you want to rely upon that to allow this woman to remarry? No, that's not enough. Maybe it's two different Amoraim reflecting the position of Rabbi Yochanan. And maybe Rabbi Yochanan is of the position that we can't rely on it even from this point forward because it's not a reliable that we can't rely upon it, and so therefore, and so therefore maybe Rabbi Yochanan changed his position, and he no longer says he's believed under these circumstances. And indeed, yeah, we have to be concerned in this case, and since there's no cold, there's no sound, there's no noise that she got the get, therefore we don't believe him that she can remarry, and she would need chalitza under these circumstances. In the next case, there was a person about whom we had the assumption he had no brothers. Amar b'shas misa so he had no brother. We have the assumption that he has no brothers, and he said when he was about to die that he has no brothers. So there was both the assumption and his statement. So Amar Rav Yosef, yeah. In this case, let her remarry. What do we have to be concerned about? So that's what Rav Yosef says. And first of all, we have chazaka that he has no brothers. And second of all, right. He also is saying when he's about to die, he said he has no brothers. So we should believe him he has no brothers. So Amri Abaye, Amri Diika Edim Medina Sayam. So Abaye, Rav Yosef's student, says to his Rebbe, but it's not so simple because if people in the town are saying that there are witnesses overseas that know the Yadi de Islayachi, there are people overseas that there are witnesses that they know that he has a brother. So Abaye says maybe we have to be concerned for the fact that there may be witnesses overseas. So Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, Hashtamias Halesnu, but right now these witnesses aren't here. Hashtamias Halesnu, come on. The witnesses are not in front of us right now. And isn't this the case where Rav Chanina ruled in a similar case that we don't have to be concerned about the possibility of witnesses overseas? Rav Hainu de Rav Chanina, that what did Rav Chanina say? Eidim b'tzad istan. That, and Rashbam tells us, Eidim b'tzad istan v'teyatzer. Rashbam reminds us this is the case from Ksuvos, Perika Isha Shenisarmoa, that there was the daughters of Shmuel who came forward and said, yeah, that they were captured, but they're still allowed to marry a Kohen because they claimed that they weren't assaulted. If they had been assaulted in captivity, they would not be allowed to marry a Kohen. And Rebbe Chanina allowed them and to remarry based upon what they said. And the Gemara said, but how could that be? But there are witnesses overseas that they were defiled. So Rabbi Chanina said, what, we're going to be worried about the witnesses in Istan, which is the north, and they're going to be prohibited, meaning to say we don't have to track down these witnesses. If the witnesses are here, we'd ask them. And since they're not here, we don't have to be worried about them. So therefore, in this case also, we don't have to go after, says Rav Yosef, we shouldn't have to go after these witnesses to discover indeed if he has a brother and she has to do chalitza. So the Gemara says, Amoy Abaye, Emekalnu b'shvuya, Nekel b'heshesish. Abaye says, no, to that case, Rebbe Chanina said we could be lenient by a captive woman, by a woman who's captive. And so, but here it's a married woman, we can't be as lenient. And Rashbam explains by a captured woman, the sages were lenient because we would even believe one woman and one witness to say she's Tahora. And the reason is because it's just a regular prohibition. And also, most women would prevent themselves from being made, would try as hard as they can to prevent themselves from being assaulted. And they try to make themselves look disgusting, etc. And also, it's not the same prohibition as adultery. And so therefore, it's not comparable to a married woman. Even though in this case, a woman who falls to Yibum, it's not as severe as violation as adultery, but nevertheless, it's within the rubric of a married woman. And so therefore, it's not comparable. And so when Rav Yosef heard this, so Rava said to Rav Nasan, Barami, indeed, you have to be concerned for this position, for the possibility that there are witnesses overseas. Gemara says in the next case in the Mishnah was Boker Tov Hobbs, good morning. We're on the bottom of 135a, that the case says, if he says, this is my brother, he's not believed. Let's just review what the case of the Mishnah says. We're around 8 lines from the bottom on 135a. If let's say there are 2 brothers, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven says, Levi is also my brother. So then Reuven and Shimon inherit, but we don't believe Reuven to say that Levi gets to split equally with Reuven and Shimon. But he does get to share in Reuven's property because Reuven says he's my brother. Then when Levi dies, Reuven gets back the share that he split with Reuven. But anything that Levi would get on his own, Shimon would also share to inherit. So the Gemara is going to analyze this. The Gemara says, okay, Reuven is claiming that Levi is his brother. But what in effect is Shimon saying? Remember, Reuven and Shimon are definitely brothers. Reuven says Levi is his brother. So what's Shimon's claim in all this? If he says, in fact, he is indeed my brother, so if he in fact says his brother, then so why does Levi only get to take from Reuven's property? He should also get to take from Shimon's if in fact Shimon admits that Levi is his brother. So it must be that Shimon is saying Levi is not my brother. It can't be. If he says he's not my brother, Amos Sefer, what's the next clause of the Mishnah? It says that if Levi gets other assets, Shimon would also get to inherit with him. Why does Shimon get to take in that? He just said specifically, he's not my brother. Mar says, no, so it must be that Shimon is saying, we don't know if Levi is my brother. And so therefore, Levi does not get to take from that portion. But once he dies, any new property Shimon gets to take because Reuven is admitting that Levi is the brother. And so therefore, Shimon gets to take from it. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. There's a Shas topic, Shas dispute, in the case of where we say, Ein Anu Yodin, whether or not he gets to take. And here we can prove from here about that. Zosomeras, Manuli Biyatcha, Hola Omar, Eni Odea Pater. But the Shas topic, a little bit differently. Shas topic that if a person makes a claim against somebody and he says, I don't know, he's exempt, because in this case, Levi is in effect saying, I'm your brother to Shimon. And Shimon's saying, I don't know, and he doesn't get to take. Levi doesn't get to take from Shimon. So why don't we answer this question, which is a dispute throughout Shas, that like Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Nachman who say he's exempt. And they argue with Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda in Baba Kama, Kuf Yud Chesam and Alf, and also in other places. So the Gemara says, so why don't we answer that Shas topic from this, the Shas dispute from this Mishnah? Abaye says, no, we're not going to say that. We're on the top of Kuflid, Ahmed Hayam, Ahmed Alf, Ahmed Beis at the top. Well, no, really, I could say that if you say, I don't know, then in general, you're liable. But Shani Hacha, this case is different. Why? The Kamano Achar B'Yadchodami. It's not directly, Levi is not making the claim to Shimon. Reuven is making the claim on behalf of Levi to Shimon. So it's like, you owe somebody else $100, and he says, I don't know. So in that case, even Rav Nachman and Rav Yochanan would say he's butter. And the Rashbam explains, because the Bari V'Shema, Bari Adif, V'Shani Acha, but this case is different. The Safek Atzmo Eino Yodea, because Levi himself doesn't know in this case, and so therefore he can't make a claim that you owe me the money, because it's a Sfek Sfeko, it's a double doubt. It's a double doubt. He doesn't know. One guy says, I don't know. And the other guy says, I also don't know. And so therefore, we leave the money where it is. But if the brother would say, I'm sure, then under those circumstances, he would be able to take a portion in it. So it's not going to be dispositive about that earlier dispute. Then we said in the Mishnah that if Levi in this case would die, then Reuven would get back his share of the inheritance. But if he would get other property, then Reuven and Shimon would split it. So by Rava, Shevach Sheshipku Nechasa Me'aleim Ma'u. So now Rava asked the question. This is not the phrase Shevach Sheshipku Nechasa Me'aleim is not what it typically means. Typically, it means that if the profits just went up on their own, if the property went up on its own. Here it means something else. So here it means the property increased in value. What are we talking about? So does Shimon get to split that? So if it's property, typically speaking, that means ready to be cut. But here it means that Levi worked it and he did work on it. So he improved it personally. That's not a question. That's not part of the inheritance. That's like assets he got from a different place. And of course, Shimon will get to split that. Talking about something that it improved, but Levi had nothing to do with it. It could go in Dikla, va'olim, like you have a tree and it got thicker, or ara, va'aska, serotonin if you have land, and then it increased its value because of the minerals on it. So would Shimon get a share of that? My take, Gemara leaves that unresolved. Yes, Hobbs. No, my assumption would be, it's a very good question. My assumption would be that that's like something that Levi did on his own to improve it. I guess the question, basically, that's like where you make an active investment. But what if he's just in the bank and the interest? Yeah, that would be something that he did specifically to improve, and so that Shimon get a share in. So now, Misha Mace. So now the Mishnah, next Mishnah tells us, Misha Mace v'nimtzeis daitiki kishura. So we know that there's a shlivmera. What's a shlivmera? A shlivmera is somebody whose whole body is sick, and we're concerned that he'll be agitated and he'll come to die if we don't give him certain leniencies. So leniency is that he can say, I'm giving you away something orally, even though typically you need to do a kinyan. He could just say it, and it would take place after the death, even though normally speaking, a gift would take place right away, but we don't want to agitate him. So that's typically the law of a shlivmera. But this person dies, and you find on him a document, a shtar tzava shlivmera, a document saying what he wants to take place after his death. And so that's what he wants. So you find this document tied to his thigh. What does it mean tied to his thigh? Meaning to say, we know for sure that he wrote it, but he also never actually gave it to the person. So we can't claim somebody else wrote it because it's on him. So harezu enokum. So in this case, it's nothing. The document is useless. Meaning to say, we don't. It doesn't count for anything. Rashbam explains, achar misa also ashtar, also shenichtav lo hamatana lo kani. That even if after death the person we gave it to will come along and take it and say this was a gift that I was supposed to get, it doesn't work. Why? Rashbam explains, even though a shchimara's statement acquires after death, that's only so we don't want him to go crazy. But the shtar is not as good as what he said, because when you have a contract, you have to give it over. And in this case, since he didn't give it over to anybody, we say a contract doesn't take place after death. If he had said it, it would be like he was making a kinyan. But if he just wrote it and he held it, it's not good enough. But Zika Bala Acher, but let's say this Shlimera gave this contract to somebody else while he was still alive. Even though it doesn't say his name in it, the person who he's giving it to, he just writes to him, these assets that are written in this contract, I'm giving to you when you receive this contract from me, then it's going to work. Because the contract is not worse than an oral statement. Meaning to say, so Zika Bala Acher. So let's say he gave over the contract to somebody else, then it'll take place after the death. It will work. And it doesn't matter whether or not the person is one of his heirs or not for Kayamin, then it'll work, because what he's effect saying is this is a Shlimera statement, but I'm writing it down and giving it to you to take place after death. So Tana Rabbanan, so the rabbis first explain what is this daitiki? What does it mean? Ezohi daitiki. So what is this daitiki? So the daitiki means kol shekasava date lamekam vlios. Basically, he says this is date lamekam vlios. This is a document which will take place. Everything that's written in it, that if he dies, then my assets will go to this person. So kol shekasava date lamekam vlios. Ve'ezi matana. And what's a gift? What's the difference between a shlimmer and a gift? A gift is kol shekasava ma'yom achar misa. A gift is if you write, it'll take place from today and after my death, which we'll see more about this on tomorrow's daf. It means you're giving the person the principal, but the guy gets to keep the fruits until after his death. So the Gemara first says, what do you mean? That a gift means in order to do a gift, you have to say from today and after death. But if I'm giving to you right now, it's not a gift. Doesn't make sense. Obviously, you can give a gift right now. So Amar Abaye, Hachikamar. So Abaye says, no, this is what we mean. Ezu matanas bari. What does it mean when you give a gift as a healthy person, which is the equivalent, Sheika matanas shlimera, which is the equivalent of a gift after death? The lokani el achar misa. How can you shlimera? The person who's sick, it only takes effect after his death. What's the definition? How can you do a healthy person's gift and have it take effect after his death? This is what we want to do lots of times with trust, estates. So he says you have to write this phrase, and then if you do that, it will take effect after the death. So Yosef Rabba Barav Huna Balchadra de Beirav, the Yosef Kamar Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Ravuna was sitting there in the porch of, or the portico of Rav, and he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Shlimera Shamar Kisvu Tenu Manu Aploni. So a Shlimera is supposed to say it orally, but in this case, he added on a phrase. Now we have a concept in the Torah, in the Talmud, called Mosif Gorea. Whoever adds on is actually messing things up. He messed things up a little here because he didn't say just give it. He said write it and give it to this person. Umeis, and then he died. So then, after he's dead, it doesn't take effect. Why? Says Rabbi Yochanan, Ein kotzav v'nosnin shema lo gamar laknoso ela b'shtar. We don't allow it to take place after the death because maybe he really only wanted to give it through a contract. Vein shtar la'achar misa, and there's no contract after death. So by adding in write it, he messed himself up, and it doesn't take effect. So Amar Lahu, Rabbi Elazar is Daruba. Rabbi Elazar, who was a student of Rabbi Yochanan, said, be careful about this halacha, meaning they follow Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Shizvi had the same version, but he reversed the names. He says Rabbi Elazar Amra, but Amar Lahu Rabbi Yochanan is Daruba. Rabbi Elazar is the one who said this. And Rabbi Yochanan said, yeah, you have to be careful about it. So Amrav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Kavasi to Rav Shizvi Mistabra. It's logical to assume that Rav Shizvi is the one who's correct, because Amra is B'Shlomo Rabbi Eliezer Amra. If you want to say Rabbi Elazar is the one who said it, Itzich Rabbi Yochanan Lasude Alei de Rabbi Elazar. Would Rabbi Yochanan need to testify that it's logical to say that Rabbi Elazar has said it? Why? Because Itzich Rabbi Yochanan Lasude Alei de Rabbi Elazar. Because Rabbi Yochanan, who was the Rebbe of Rabbi Elazar, he would need to come along and testify. This is what my student said, and the law is like it. Ella Yamar, it's Rabbi Yochanan Amra. But if you want to say Rabbi Yochanan is the one who said this, it's Rabbi Elazar Lasudele the Rabbi Yochanan Rabbe. Does Rabbi Elazar need to testify that his Rebbe is correct? No. Yeah, obviously, what your Rebbe says is correct, and you don't need him to testify. The student doesn't need to testify. So it's logical to assume Rabbi Elazar said it, Rabbi Yochanan approves it. But Tashma, and furthermore, we have a teaching, Rabbi Elazar Amra, the Shalch, I'll prove to you that Rabbi Elazar is the one who said it. The Shalch Rabin Mishmei de Rabbi Yavo, that Rabin sent in the name of Rabbi Yavo, have a Yodim Sheshalch Rabbi Elazar Lagola Mishum Rabbeinu. You should be aware that Rabbi Elazar sent a message to the diaspora, to Babylon, in the name of his teacher, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Shlim Marash Amar Kisvu Tenu Manu Aponi. If there's a shlimera, this person who's sick, who said, write and give this money to this person, umeis, and he died, ein kos v'minosnin, you don't write it and give it after his death. Maybe he was being careful, his makbid, to specifically use a contract. And there's no contract after death. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Tibadek. And Rabbi Yochanan said, indeed, check this out, Amai Tibadek. And what does it mean to be Tibadek? What does that mean? It means to be like careful about it. Mighty badek. So ki'atzer. So we want to say what that means. So now we still want to know what does Rabbi Yochanan mean. So here we say that Rav Dimi came. Usually you have Rav Dimi followed by Ravin, but here Ravin comes first. This is unusual. I didn't see anybody point it out, but that's really the idea. So ki'atzer Rav Dimi, he said two halachos. The first one the Rashbam says is not relevant to what we're trying to say. It's just brought down because he had this teaching, so they brought them both together. But the first one is daitiki mivatelas daitiki, that if there was a shlimera who gave this contract, which was in effect a statement of his will to take place after his death, He gave it to one person. Then he could cancel it out by giving another contract. That normally speaking, a contract cannot be canceled out by a second contract. Uh, um, but in this case, the second one, since the daitiki is functioning like a shlimera, can cancel it out. Look at Rashbam. Shlimera shekasav nechasav le'echad v'chasav v'kasav le'acher sheni kana rishon lo kana. So first he wrote it to one person, and then he wrote it for a second person. The second contract cancels out the first one because the shlimera can go back on his gift. And since he wrote it to the second person, he's canceled. The dafka b'ksiva below zikoi. And Rashbam points out that's only if you write it, but you didn't actually give it over. Like we say later on, Pshita, Kasaf Lazev, Hainu Dechiaser Avdimi, Amar Daitki Vatelas Daitki, Kasaf Azikola, Kasaf Azikola Zeh, Rav Amar Rishon Kana. But by a gift of a healthy person, which you can't go back on, the first one is acquired and not the second one. So in this case, we're saying that if he would actually give it, it would be a dispute in the Gemara. Hold on one second. It's a dispute later on exactly in what way it cancels it out. That'll be on Kuf Nun Beis, but so we'll deal with that when we get to there. But now the second case that Rav Dimi said, which is relevant, which is Shlimra Sha'amar Kisvu Tenu Manu Laponi Umeis. If Shlimra said, write and give this document to this person, this money to this person, and then he dies, Rowan in Kimiyafas Kocho. We have to see what does he mean when he says to write it. If he's just trying to strengthen the gift that he's giving, then we're going to do it even after his death. Vimlav in Kosvin, but otherwise we don't write it. Like Rabbi Yochanan was saying, be careful, tibadek. So Masav Rav Abba Bar Mamo, Bari Shamar Kisvut. So he challenges it. It says in the Brisa, Bari Shamar Kisvut Tanu Manu Aponi. If he says in the Brisa, a healthy person who said, write and give this gift to this person who makes en kosvin v'nosnin. The healthy person, we don't write it and give it. But Shlimera kosvin v'nosnin. If a Shlimera, we should write it after his death. So most of all, Mefarakos or Mamo asked the question, he answered it. The Miyafas Kocho. That when does the Shlimera write it after his death? Where he says to write it only to strengthen the position of the gift. And what does it mean that how do we know he's just trying to strengthen the position? Like Rav Chisda taught, where he says this phrase, and he's doing this kinyan in addition to the gift. And Hachinami, the Amar Af where he's saying the word Af also, meaning to say it's a gift, but I'm also saying to write it down and to sign it. The other way, meaning to say to strengthen as a proof in addition to the actual gift. And in Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, that in this circumstance, that in a case where you use this phrase and he's just saying it, just writing it down to strengthen his position, then you could even do it after the death. Okay, we'll stop here. This is today's daf, a beautiful daf, and God willing, pick this up right after davening.